Hey everyone, welcome to the pre-algebra video for 5.5. We're talking about dividing fractions today. Awesome stuff. I know you will be able to handle it just fine. So the first thing let's talk about is the term reciprocal. What is a reciprocal? Well, a reciprocal, or reciprocals, are two non-zero numbers whose product is 1, and that means literally the number 1, okay? So two non-zero numbers whose product, well, product means multiply, so two numbers that multiply together to get 1 are reciprocal. So let's talk about the number 5. What is his reciprocal? Well, 5 times what number would get you 1? Well, the only thing that would be is actually 1/5. Okay, so if we did 5 times 1/5, I'd have to make this 5 a what? A 5 over a 1, just so I can multiply fractions appropriately. 5 times 1 is 5, 1 times 5 is 5, and 5 divided by 5 is, of course, 1. And that proves that both 5 and 1/5 are reciprocals of each other. Right, so why don't you take a second, and I want you to find the reciprocal of 4/7. Alright, so what's the reciprocal of 4/7? Well, let's see. The reciprocal of 4/7 must be a number that when you take 4/7, multiply it by that mysterious number, it's got to equal 1, right? So here's what it is. It is 7 over 4, and here's the proof. 4/7 times 7/4. Well, let's see. 4 times 7 is 28. 7 times 4 is also 28, and 28 divided by 28 is 1. The other way you can think of it is, let's see, 4/7 times 7/4. Let's do a little cross-canceling. 4 and 4 both become 1s. 7 and 7 both cross-cancel becomes 1s. 1 times 1 is 1 over 1 times 1, which is 1, and 1 over 1 is, of course, 1. So, what are we seeing here is a pattern. Well, the pattern is that to find the reciprocal, you flip the numerator and the denominator. So, what is the reciprocal of 4/7? It's 7/4. What's the reciprocal of 7/4? 4/7, right? How about this one? Why don't you try this? What's the reciprocal of -3/5? Well, let's see. It's got to be multiplied by some number that equal, and the product has to be 1. Well, let's think. This is a positive 1. I have a negative here, so a negative must be multiplied by another negative to equal positive 1. So we know that the reciprocal of -3/5 is also going to have to be negative. And we flip the numerator and the denominator, so it's going to be -5/3, right? So if we were to kind of prove this, -3 over 5 times -5 over 3, I'll assign this negative sign to the 3 on top, so let's multiply straight across the top. -3 times -5 is a positive 15. Positive 5 times positive 3 is positive 15. 15 divided by 15 is 1. So there's the proof. These two numbers are reciprocals of each other. So who cares, right? Who cares about reciprocals? Well, I'll tell you who cares. The Colonel cares. And why does the Colonel care? Because the Colonel knows that in order to divide fractions, you better know about reciprocals. And what do I mean by that? Well, Colonel works for Kentucky Fried Chicken, but we're actually using a slightly modified version of it. It's Kentucky Chicken Fried, KCF. What does KCF stand for? KCF is keep, change, flip. Keep, change, flip. Okay, kind of like Kentucky Fried Chicken, but just switch the last two. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to show you. If you had the problem 2/3 divided by 3/7, well, divide fractions. What do? You obey the Colonel and you keep, you change, you flip. What do I mean by that? Well, as you may have learned last year, it means you keep the first number or fraction. Okay, so 2/3. I've kept him. Now I'm going to change. What am I changing? I'm changing the sign. It's going from division to multiplication, right? So it's division to multiplication. And the last thing is I flip. Flipping 3/7, it becomes 7/3. And 3/7 and 7/3 are what? Reciprocals. Now, can I multiply fractions? Yes, I can, because I'm smart and so are you. And so let's do that. 2 times 7 is 14. 3 times 3 is, of course, 9. And you could leave your answer as such if you wanted. But if you didn't want to, you could make it 9 and 5. 1 and 5 ninths. And there you go. Either that or that. So I want you to take a second and I want you to obey the kernel here on number 5. Okay, obey the kernel. And let's see, why don't you do negative 2/5 divided by 4/7. Pause it, try it, play it. Let's see what you do. All right, so dividing fractions, what do I do? Obey the kernel. Obey the kernel. Obey the kernel. All right, let's obey the kernel. So, got to keep the first one. Negative 2/5 is staying put. Changing that to multiplication, and then I flip. What's the reciprocal of 4/7? It's 7/4. So now, I should just go ahead and multiply, right? Well, I could, wouldn't be wrong, but can I cross cancel anything? I can. I have a 2 here and a 4 there. Those are across from each other. So let's cancel those by dividing by the same thing. Let's divide both of them by 2. Negative 2 divided by 2 becomes a negative 1. 4 divided by 2 becomes a 2. So now let's multiply. Negative 1 times 7 is, of course, negative 7. 5 times 2 is 10. Negative 7 over 10, or negative 7/10. Either way is fine with me, but that is your answer. Question: can you solve that? Answer: yes, you can. Pause the video and give it a shot. I bet you can figure it out. Play when you're done. Let's see how you do. All right, so we are not really dividing fractions here. It wants us to divide mixed numbers. But what do we have to do with the mixed number? Turn it into a fraction, right? Okay, so what is this mixed number as a fraction? Well, 6 times 4 is 24, plus a 1. That'd be 25 over 6. And we're dividing that by, well, let's see. I have a negative mixed number. That must mean the improper fraction version of that mixed number is also negative. So let's just pretend that negative doesn't exist for a second. And 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 gives you 5/3, but it's actually a negative 5/3. So what do we do with a negative sign? Well, we need to assign it to the what? To the numerator. So I'm going to kind of erase that a little bit and give it to the negative 5. Or the 5, to make it negative. So what do we do? Obey the kernel. We're going to keep, we're going to change, we're going to flip. So we're keeping the 25/6. Check that off. We're changing division to multiplication, and we're going to flip negative 5/3. So what is the reciprocal of negative 5/3? Well, it's definitely going to be something with a 3 over 5, but because this is negative, this also has to be negative. So who gets the negative sign? Is it the 3? Does it stay with a 5? Does it matter? No, it doesn't. I'm just going to give it to the 3 to keep it on top with the numerator, and it does not matter. If you plug negative 5 over 3 in your calculator, you are going to get negative 1.6 repeating. Okay? If you do 5 divided by negative 3 in your calculator, you will still get negative 1.6 repeating. It doesn't matter. All right, so anyway, we have flipped. Now let's solve. Can I cross cancel? Yes, and this one I can cross cancel quite a bit. Let's work on these two first, okay? 5 and 25. I can divide both of those by 5, so that one will become a 1. That divided by 5 becomes a 5. Negative 3 and 6. I can divide both those by 3. So if I divide negative 3 by a 3, I'm left with a negative 1. If I divide positive 6 by 3, I'm left with a 2. So what do we multiply here? Well, let's see. Multiply straight across the top. And let's see. 5 times negative 1 is, of course, negative 5 over 2 times 1 is 2. So our answer is negative 5 over 2. Could also be written negative 5 halves, like that. If you really want to, you could make it negative 2 and 1 half. Either of those work for me, and that is your answer. Alright guys, that's all I have for you in this video, and remember, obey the kernel!